I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Rousseau's Social Contract. I'm continuing now on book two. Um, we were interrupted. I was not feeling good in the middle of. I was supposed to be doing books chapter 6 and 7 together, law and legislation together. Now I'm going to finish book 7, chapter 7 of book 2, on the legislature. Now, this is a very this chapter of Rousseau is actually a very difficult one because it is a kind of a version. What it does here is it combines the ancient conception of the lawgiver, which was very central in ancient political thinking, particularly like the idea of the founder, the creator of regimes, the founder of cities, and the founder of cities and the founders of regimes. That is, that the people who establish the either the body politic or the thing. Now, um, this echoes the famous teaching in Machiavelli's Prince of the great captains who establish great empires. Right. This is that famous when he deals with new princes. Right. In the Prince, the famous five, the four not Caesar, but Cyrus, Moses, and uh, is it, is it, oh God, I'm going to go, Tyreus? No. Um, I'm sorry. It's going to drive me crazy. Moses, Cyrus, Theseus. Theseus is right. The Athenian, right? And Romulus, right? And then the last one is Hero, right? Hero, the great example of a hero of Syracuse, right? Um, uh, as the great examples, right? Um, and we have to. I'm going to. This is the big problem in this chapter, because in the social contract conception of Hobbes and even Rousseau argues for aggregation. So therefore, we have this aggregation of actors coming together, and the idea of the general will and the formulation of a will. How do you connect these two things? Because at one level they seem completely at odds. One is understood as aggregation, and one understands it as the intervention of an individual, a powerful and willful, talented individual, would be even wise individual, who gives shape to and directs the pattern of this. Now, at one level, the classical teaching seems to be radically opposed to the kind of aggregate, pure, systematic thinking that Hobbes and Rousseau seems to be suggesting about the concept of the formation of political life, political communities, and the body politic and the state, right? The social compact. The social contract is an aggregation of wills, right? It's the collective aggregation of a whole, not one part acting on, because this is this whole argument about that's not sovereignty, that an individual cannot act for the whole in this radical sense. uh, Now here we get a problem here, because what is the legislature? Therefore we're confronted with the concept of the legislature, which would be understood both by Machiavelli and the ancients as a willing actor who, by his individuality or his ability or his wisdom or his talent or his power or his ability to manipulate the whole the situation, to get the reshape and direct the body, to reframe it, to recast, to make it to something new, either to reform it or to rebuild it or to even create it out of nothing, as an example of, let's say, of Romulus or Theseus, right? So let's go look at this now. On chapter 7, the legislature. The discovery of the best rules of society is suited to nations. So notice this: nations, people, nations, right? Would require a superior intelligence, who saw all men's passions yet experienced none of them, who had no relation at all to our nature, yet knew it thoroughly, whose happiness was independent of us, yet who was nevertheless willing to attend ours. Finally, one who was preparing for himself a future glory with the passage of time, could work in one century and enjoy reward in another. Gods would be needed to give laws to men. So this is that weird. This is a thing. Now this is that point, that the idea of this is implying that they would be gods, right? How can they could build in one century and then get the rewards of the other century? Now this is a very important, problem in that he has to confront with, because this would be kind of totally at odds with what he assumes to have argued so far in the thing. Now, notice 53, there's that famous note 53. And this is for the first draft of this chapter in the manuscript, right? He goes paragraph 1, 5, 7, and 12, 15, and 15 on the role of legislature. This is Masters on this aspect of this. Now, let's go right to this. Let's go look at this in that sense. This idea of gods. Now, the same reasoning Caligula used with respect to the fact that, with respect to fact, was used by Plato with respect to right, in defining the civil or royal man he seeks in the statesman. Now, this is interesting. This civil or political man, the politicos and the basileus in the statesman. This is a very important thing, the basileus. Now, notice they used Caligula. Remember, he used Caligula before, condemning that, oh my God, this is a god who thinks he's a god who's going to impose it on this idea of imposing on a will imposing on the whole. Okay, this is and at one level. Therefore, the reference to Caligula here is a very odd thing, because it evokes what he said earlier about Caligula, about thinking himself gods, right, above men, and that stuff, right. But now he brings it to Plato in that sense, and Plato's discussion of the statesman, which is not. It is radically different. Plato's statesman, is very different than the argument that Plato makes in the Republic. The statesman is an argument more for political man, not a. It is a. In fact, the term statesman is a mistranslation in that sense. It's the political man, the politicos in that sense, the politician in that sense. I think the word. I mean, because the word state is not what the Greeks understood as polis. The politicos. This is the politicos versus the kingly, right? And that therefore he's this tension of the kingly man versus the politically man in that sense that he seeks to go here, and that therefore it's Rousseau seems to say there's the same reason Caligula used respect to this fact about his power. Remember that royal rule: I'm better than you, that wiser than you, I'm better than you, I'm godlike. I'm godlike. Remember, this goes back all the way to the earlier use of his earlier thing of Caligula, right? So at one hand, we have the tone of what is said suggests this is negative. But maybe we should ignore the tone and pay attention to the argument. But if it is true that a great prince is a rare man, what about a great legislator? So if this idea, the idea that a prince is going to be a rare man, something rare, not common, very odd in that sense, right? This is not going to be, they're going to be godlike in that sense. It's not going to be ordinary. It's not going to be the norm. It's going to be something exceptional, right? If this is true about a prince, right, it is going to be more true about a great legislator. Now, this is the problem. Now, Machiavelli argues that legislators and princes, a great prince, and a good legislator intersect. The Machiavellian position is those 2 points intersect. Rousseau wants to separate them more. The former only has to follow the model that the latter should propose. So the prince only has to follow the model that the latter should propose. That's Machiavelli. Machiavelli might not disagree with this. I think this is where Rousseau and Machiavelli would have. And no, Jean-Jacques. Niccolo said, Jean-Jacques, you're just full of it here. I'm sorry, no. It's the great princes who make these things. the great legislature and the great prince are intersect. They're great minds. They're great minds who know this. And their desire to rule and to do great things lead them to do this. That this is make your point that the prince follows the lawgiver. The ordinary prince would follow the lawgiver, yes, but the great prince, no. So therefore, let's be careful here. The latter is a mechanic who invents the machine. So the latter, in other words, he invents the machine. The former is only the workman who puts it together and starts its running. So therefore, that's the big difference. Right? This idea now, this accepts. Rousseau is playing something back onto Plato. Back in the Plato insists, or Socrates insists, one man, one art, or one art, one technique, one knowledge. The Machiavelli does not accept this. Machiavelli's the great princes, are not just a possessor of one art. Is actually must possess many arts, a multiplicity of arts. So the real point of Plato here is to kind of engage in we're accepting the Plato or the Socratic injunction of one man, one art, and therefore we're prevented of having the two. We must separate the two, the statesman and the politicos, the one who creates versus the one who executes or carries out or works, functions with the tool that is created, right? So again, the log is the mechanic who invents the machine, and the former is only the workman. Notice the politician is now reduced here. Notice this. This is almost very interesting. Who put it together and starts running. At the birth of society, says Montesquieu, the leaders of a republic creates the institutions. Thereby, it is the institutions that form the leader of republics. This is from Montesquieu's Consolation of the Romans. This is a very important point that Montesquieu makes in this sense. I think this is an interesting point about the role of the idea of, and this is Montesquieu is kind of echoing the ancient position that the political men make institutions, and then the institutions then establish what the future leaders, who's going to come after them. Okay, that's one who dares to undertake the founding of a people. Now notice this. Notice the shift. Beginning, we talked about nations, and now people. This is the problematic. This is going to be a very theme in this. The distinction between people and nation. And I think that's a thing that this is a problem in Rousseau, and also because for Hobbes and Rousseau, the nation is accidental. People, a nation is nothing more than a people, a particular people. This is something that both Rousseau and I think Hobbes ultimately does, and this is something that will challenge the later peoples of the thinkers of nationalism are going to challenge this to a great degree. Someone like Herder, coming for the post-Kantian birth of thinking of nationals, like both Fichte in his letters to Germany, his famous letter to the German people, and then Herder's thinking about the question of how culture shapes up people, right? So therefore, this is going to be a thing about here. So therefore, undertake the foundation of a people should feel that he is capable of changing human nature, so to speak. So the idea that you're going to form people, you have to change human nature, the claim is, right? So to speak, not literally, but in other words, being able to modify nature to some degree, to adapt it or to shape it, right? So of transforming each individual who by himself is perfect in a solitary whole into a part of a larger whole, from which this individual receives, in a sense, his life and his being. of altering man's constitution in order to strengthen it, of substituting a partial and moral existence for the physical and independent existence we have all received from nature. So, in other words, that this is something of substituting a partial and moral existence for the physical and so the natural one is that physical and independent. Now, notice this: by nature, man is a solitary. That is the assumption, the independent existence we have received by nature. This is a very important assumption that man in the state of nature are solitary beings, are isolated solitary beings, not social beings. This is the assumption of the logic of how the grammar of what is being said here asserts. This is a Hobbesian logic. So that the idea of this is why the contract, in other words, we have to make something artificial of substituting a partial and moral existence for this, right? So we have to alter nature. This is Hobbes' conquest of nature, right? The Leviathan is the artificial technology, the state, the Leviathan is a artificial construct of man in order to escape nature. Rousseau agrees here, or at least at the surface of here agrees. Not explicitly, but implicitly by the claim of what he's saying here, right? In other words, he has to get what in other words, the individual who by himself is a perfect solitary whole, into a part of a larger whole of which this individual receives, in a sense, his life and his being. So, in other words, and therefore of altering his constitution in order to strengthen it. The other thing that man in nature is not sufficiently strong; he's weak. It is that only by entering in society and in the state, the body politic, is his nature strengthened. He must, in short, take away man's own forces in order to give him forces that are foreign to him and that he cannot make use of without the help of others. In other words, he has to, in the state of nature, the things that are natural to man. Okay, in short, he must take away man's own forces, those ones inherent to his nature, in order to give him forces that are not foreign, alien to him, external, things that are not his own, and that he cannot make use of without the help of others. And that's the externality thing. The more these natural forces are dead and destroyed, and the acquired ones great and lasting, the more the institution as well, the more the institution as well is solid and perfect. So we have to, in other words, we have to overcome the natural state. Again, this is pure Hobbesian. This is Hobbesian understanding. The idea that our natural thing has to be, the institution of that has to be replaced by this artificial thing that has to be, these natural forces are dead and destroyed and are required by, and the required ones great and lasting. That they're now replaced, that they're lasting, they're now permanent. The institutions are well and solid. So that if each citizen is nothing, and can do nothing except with all the others. And if the forces acquired by the whole is equal or superior to the sum of the natural forces of all the individuals, it may be said that the legislature has reached the highest possible point of perfection. So therefore, this last thing is odd. He's saying that the height of a legislative perfection is when what? That each citizen is nothing and can do more except. This is the perfect condition. This is not going to happen. This is maybe too extreme. This is not. He's not saying this is the outcome always. This is the legislation has reached its highest possible point of perfection. So this is the height. This is the thing that one would. He argues that is the ultimate perfection of the legislative act. This idea of that each citizen is nothing and can do nothing except with all the others. In other words, what does this mean by this? This is a problem. This can lead us to think, oh, this is collectivism. It's a big. No, I think this is the problem. I mean, I think he means here. This is the problem of the Rousseauish language. Rousseau's language can mislead as more than it leads. It's the power of Rousseau's language misleads the reader. We need to take a step back and remember the context of what he said earlier about the connection between law and what law is, right? Law is always the general, not the specific will. There's a difference between law and decree in this sense. And therefore, in this light, we have to understand what Rousseau was talking about. Lawmaker is the creation of that general will, that creation of the body politic in this sense. So at one level, what is supposed to be merely an aggregation, Rousseau is going to be saying, Rousseau gives us an ambiguity here. What should be a mere aggregation that arises spontaneously is now suggested that there is an actor, a will behind it. An actor or actors who are not, they're not, how can I say this? They're individual wills. They're private individual wills who are above the norm, everyone else in that sense, for some reason. But how does this then not undermine the whole point of that general will cannot be constructed by? Well, no, it is him saying that I'm not sure how we're going to do this. This is the contradiction in the example of the legislature that really drives us raises concerns here, right? The legislator is an extraordinary man, and in the legislator is an extraordinary man in the state in all respects. He should be so by his genius. He is no less so by his function. So in double sense, he is an extraordinary man. He's not an ordinary man in that sense. And the state. Wait a minute. So we have to understand we have to understand legislation as the lawmaking in this terms of the division of powers, which he wants to kind of not say. We understand one level. We understand legislator is in terms of the functions of power in the state. If we look at the functions of the state in terms of its functionality and a division of labor thing, we distinguish between what is the lawmaking, that which decides, or Aristotle would say decides, that who executes and those adjudicates, right? That's the famous Aristotelian dichotomy. The modern Hobbesian Lockean is we say decision making is legislating. Hobbes, Locke, particularly Locke, and Rousseau, being coy here, he wants to avoid division of powers. He's a purposely argue, oh no, because if you talk about division of powers, you divide the sovereign. Which is he doesn't want to say you can't divide sovereignty in the sense, because once you divide sovereignty, it's no longer sovereignty, right? That's the whole point that he said earlier. So the frame of reference he adapted now makes him have to put this aside. But now legislation comes up, and what is meant by legislature. Now he abandons the Lockean conception of legislature and turns to the ancient one. That's interesting. See. He turns to the ancient one, which is the prefigure of the body politic, where the Hobbesian Lockean legislator is the agent. It is an instrument internal of the sovereign, who is the sovereign has assigned to do something. So now, therefore, this is very interesting. He has to be what he should be so by his genius, right? He is therefore his genius and his wisdom in that sense, right? He should be also by his function, right? So therefore, not only that, he should be extraordinary in his function as well, the extraordinarius, right? It is not magistrate, in other words. So he's not a magistrate. So this is again, this is the difference between, I think, Hobbes and Locke. The legislator for Hobbes and Locke is a magistrate in the ordinary sense of the way. The legislator, in that sense, the one who carries that, who make law, in that sense, has to be the parliamentary entity, right? This is a magistracy in that sense. It is not sovereignty. This is a part, right? This is the logic of his own logic. This function, which constitutes the republic, now this function, which constitutes the republic, does not enter in its does not enter into its constitution. So he's external to the constitution. He does not enter into its constitution. It is a particular and superior activity that has nothing in common with human dominion. That is even more interesting. There was dominion, this idea of human dominion. There was a ruling over other people. It is a particular and superior activity that has nothing in it. For if one who has authority over men should not have authority over the laws, one who has authority over the laws should also have authority. One who has authority over the laws should also not have authority over men. So that's a weird thing. For if someone who has authority over men should not have authority over the laws, right? This is that first one. This is that one who has authority over men, not have authority over laws, and one who has authority over the law should not have. So this is exclusion. That if you have authority over men, the individual actors, you're a magistrate. If you have understood the law, you have sovereignty. Okay, it's double sense, right? I think this is that. Otherwise, his laws, ministers of his passions, would often only perpetuate his injustices, and he would never avoid having private views alter the sanctity of his work. So, therefore, this is very interesting. This is that weird. This is why this passage is very confusing. Because otherwise, his laws, ministers of his passion, would often only perpetuate his injustices, and he could never avoid having private views alter the sanctity of his work. So he can't be a private man in this sense. If it was a private man, private actor, this would always lead to his private will. This is the whole problem of the private will, where it says the private wills cannot generate law. That only collective wills, general wills, can create law all the way before. Now we get into the problem here in this sense. And this is why this is a little frustrating in that sense. While Lycurgus gave his homeland laws, he began by abdicating the throne. So he was no longer, in other words, the example is he's Lycurgus, he gives up his kingdom. He's no longer king. So he gives up his throne, and he's no longer a leader. He's no longer a ruler. This is the thing. He's no longer ruling. He has no more authority over men. He's now making authority over laws. It's the metaphor that he's doing. So therefore, but wait a minute. How can he? He's a private individual. How can he form the general will in that sense, right? It was the custom of most Greek cities to entrust the establishment of their laws to a foreigner. Therefore, it's a foreigner, a stranger, not one of yours, not to be subject to it, right? This is a custom of the Greek world. The modern republics of Italy often imitated this practice. The Republic of Geneva did so too, with good results. Now we have two dictums here. We have to go to the first dictum up here, which I missed. Did I miss it? The Lycurgus one. People who become famous when a people only become famous when its legislation starts to decline. Right. This is the idea. It is not known how many centuries the institution founded by Lycurgus created happiness of the Spartans before the rest of Greece became aware of them. In other words, it only did a decline. I said joke about that. Right. This is the word of another. Right. In a sense. Right. But then here, this is the point too about Calvin. Right. Geneva. Those who consider Calvin as a theologian do not understand the extent of his genius. The drawing up of our very wise edicts, in which he played a large part, does him as much honor as his institute. Whatever revolution time may bring about in our cult, as long as the love of the homeland and liberty is not extinguished among us, the memory of that great man will never be ceased to be blessed. So therefore, he sees Calvin as not only as a theologian and his institutes, but rather the laws of Geneva, the institute in that sense. And again, he's a Frenchman, a foreigner, who comes there as a preacher, and then he gives him not only civil laws, like Numa. There's a kind of Numa-esque quality in Calvin and Rousseau's viewpoint. During its finest period, Rome saw all the crimes of tyranny revealed in its midst and nearly perished as the result of combining legislative authority and sovereign authority in the same hands, right? That's the December, right? That was that moment, right? During the high point of that, they decided to make the laws. What they did was they created the December, December is supposed to make the laws. So the people wanted the laws, so they get the Senate and consuls to surrender all authority to the Decemvirs, and they were tyrannical, right? That's famous things. However, even Decemvirs never took upon themselves the right to have any laws passed solely on their authority. Quote, nothing we propose, they said to the people, can become law without your consent. Romans, be yourselves the author of the Rome laws that should create your happiness. This is, again, this is that quote. I think this is this is 56. Yeah, this is just this from December is Montesquieu. This is from Montesquieu in that sense, right? He's quoting, and also this is also Licky says compare Montesquieu about the on the spirit of the laws. He goes, the 10 men of the Roman Republic alone had all the legislative power and all the executive power and all the power of judging. Rome found itself subject to a tyranny as cruel as that of the Tarquins, right? This is Spirit of the Laws, book 6, chapter 15. And then he says, now compare that, Montesquieu to Montesquieu, Livy, book 140, which is a similar critique. So therefore, this is that here. Now let's continue here. He who drafts the laws, therefore, does not, nor should not, have any legislative right. So those who make the laws should not have this legislative right. And the people itself cannot, even if it wanted to, divest itself of this incommensurable right. Because according to this fundamental compact, only the general will obligates private individuals and can never be assured that a private will is in conformity with the general will until it has been submitted to a free vote of the people. I have already said this, but it is not useless to repeat it. So therefore, this again, this idea that only private wills cannot make the law, only the general will. So the people do this, and then the people must vote on it and consent to it, and only then that it becomes the law. Because only then only the private will, when acting in uniformity with the general will, is becomes the it says the general will until it has been submitted to a free vote of the confirmed. Private will is in conformity with the general will only at that moment when there's a submitted to a free vote of the people, right? Okay, this is that problem. This is the idea of democratic consent. So the legislator here is not somebody who imposes; he proposes. He not imposes, but proposes, and that the laws aren't created by his authority, but by the consent of those who he proposed the law to. This is how he merges. This is how he reshapes the ancient order. He reshapes the ancient order by bringing the ancient and modern together, bringing the ancient legislature in light with the argument of the social contract, and sees that therefore the individual actor of the ancient is merely a proposer, not an imposer. Machiavelli would say, "Whoa, nonsense!" Right? What degree would Machiavelli say, "No, no, 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 no"? No, the will of the prince is more important. The will of the legislator is what makes the will of the people, that makes that new will. Rousseau seems to not want wants to sidestep that. It ignores that point of Machiavelli. And I maybe even argue the ancients too. If we look at stuff like what Plato says about this, and also what even what not so much Rousseau, not so much Aristotle book 2. Yeah, I think so. Politics, but ouch, I have a tooth. I think it's going to have to come out soon. Um, Thus, one finds combined in the work of legislation two things that seem incompatible: an undertaking beyond human force, and to execute it the authority that amounts to nothing. This is why he says it's incompatible. Incompatible. What undertaking beyond human force, will an action of the human will, and to execute it an authority that amounts that doesn't have authority, that there was no authority. This is the mystery here. This is why this is the contradiction of that situation. Another difficult. So therefore, this is combines two things that are incompatible, right? Something that it's almost godlike ability, godlike force to do, but then there's no authority that really has an authority that amounts to have no authority, right? Another difficult deserves attention. Wise men who want to use their own language rather than that of the common people cannot be understood by the people. Okay. Wise men who want to use their own language rather than that of the common people cannot be understood by the people. Now, there are 1,000 kinds of ideas that are impossible to translate into the language of people. Overly general views and overly remote objects are equally beyond its grasp. So, too general, universal views and overly remote things. So this is the problem: is how do you communicate to people? How can this is the problem of how can the people know? Because in order for it to be valid, the people must agree to it. The people must consent to it. The common people must consent to it. The people as a whole, which means the common people, right? So therefore, impossible to translate this, right? Each individual appreciating no other aspect of government than the one that relates to his private interest has difficult perceiving the advantage he should obtain from the continued deprivation imposed by good laws. This is a problem, right? This is the problem. Each individual appreciating no other aspect of government than the ones related to their private interests has a problem with seeing the advantage, the utility that he can obtain in the what? The continued deprivations, the costs imposed upon him by good laws, right? In order for the emerging people to appreciate the healthy maxims of politics and follow the fundamental rules of statecraft, the effects would have to become the cause. The effects would have to be the cause. In other words, this is interesting. The effects would have to become the cause. For the emerging people to appreciate the benefits of the healthy maxims of politics and to follow the rules that is installed by statecraft, the effects would have to be the cause. The social spirit, which should be the result of the institution, would have to preside over the founding of the institution itself. This is a contradiction, right? Wait a minute. That the social spirit, which should be the result of the institution, needs to preside over the foundation of the institution itself. And the laws would have to be prior, and men would have to be prior to laws that they ought to become by means of law. Contradictions, right? First, this is the three contradictions here. That the social spirit needs that is often created by the social spirit, which is often created by the institutions, are necessary for the creation of those institutions. Itself, and the men who would have to be prior to the laws. Men, in other words, and men would have to be prior to laws what they ought to become by means of the laws. It's a contradiction, right? This is a space-time problem. Well, you have to be what you're going to become. Since legislation is therefore unable to either use force or reasoning, he must necessarily have recourse to. In other words, must have recourse to another sort of authority, which can win over without violence and persuade without convincing or reasoning. Now, Rousseau does not. It's Weber who talks about. It's Max Weber in a couple of his works, both his economics and politics, but also in his um, 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 short vocation of politics as well. Talks about the three claims of authority that of tradition or custom, which is this is habit, custom, tradition. This is a source of authority. The second one is rational, legalistic, rational reason, persuasion, right? So he doesn't use force. He doesn't say force, but he's tradition, custom, habit, rational, and last charisma. It's attraction. You attract. Charisma is understood as this idea that someone is attracted. This is ties to religion and the power of this. Now, I think this is where Rousseau kind of gives us this idea that there is something about. This is where religion plays the role. I think in Rousseau, that it's religion. It is only in religion or the charisma that it persuades without force, and it also persuades without kind. It's a persuasion without convincing or calculating, rational in that sense. And I think this is a thing that we'll have to, and this is why we'll get to religion in that sense. I think this is why you cannot escape the question of legislature with the question of religion. I think this is why Machiavelli will say that too. This is what has always forced the fathers of the nation to have recourse to the invention of heaven, right? Exactly. And to attribute their own wisdom to the gods, so that people, subject to the laws of the state as those of nature, and recognizing the same power in the formation of man and the city, might obey with freedom and bear with docility the yoke of public felicity. So this idea of the gods, this is the divine, something powerful that they all of a sudden they come in awe, not coercion, awe. In other words, this is Rousseau's point here about this, that it's an awe that persuades. In other words, it's to win without violence and to persuade without convincing. And this is why the foreigners of nations relied on intervention of heaven and the wisdom of the gods, because it gives this power, right? It is this sublime reason which arises above the grasp of common men, whose decisions the legislature places in the mouths of immortals in order to convince by divine authority those who cannot be moved by human prudence. Now, this is that footnote, and this is that from Livy, right? This is from Livy 57, book 1, chapter 2 of, of this. I'll just read the passage. I think it's 57. And nor in fact are there ever a legislature who, in introducing new extraordinary laws to a people, did not have recourse to God, for otherwise they would not be accepted, since many benefit from which a prudent man is aware, but are not so evident to reason that he can convince others of them. Right, and this is why the example of Moses, the famous example by of Machiavelli in the book, the discussion of the great captains mentions Moses, right? Moses is clearly that of one of God, right? In pursuit of God. Um, So, but it is not every man who can make God speak or be believed when he declares himself an interpreter. The legislator's great soul is to the true miracle that should prove his mission. Again, this is very much. Again, this is what he says. What Rousseau says here about the legislature just marks so much of what Weber will say about the charisma, the charismatic leader. Um, and I think this is and why Moses is kind of a very essential. This is why he doesn't mention Moses. Well, he does. No, he kind of hints at it here, right? Look at this, right? The legislator's great soul is the true miracle that should prove his mission. Any man can engrave stone tablets, buy an oracle, pretend to have a secret relationship with some divinity, train a bird to walk on his ear, find other crude ways to impress the people. But one who knows only that much might even assemble by chance a crowd of madmen, but he will never found an empire, and his extravagant work will soon die along with him. False tricks can form a fleeing bond. Wisdom alone can make it durable. So therefore, there's a kind of argument of, okay, outcome, result. Uh, you know it's real because of its result. He talked to God. Success. This is a quite Machiavellian moment. This is at one level Rousseau denies is kind of a counter Machiavelli, but now here he is accepting that success is the determinant. How do we know whether this appeal to God is really an appeal, a source of God? It's just the success of it. The false ones will fail. The true ones will succeed. Quite Machiavellian. The effectual versus the ineffectual. The failure are ineffectual. The truth is effectual. This seems to be a very point here, right? That he will never be able to found an empire. His extravagant works would soon die with him. False tricks can form a fleeing bond. Wisdom alone can make it durable. Jewish law, which is still in existence, and the law of the son of Ishmael, which has ruled half the world for half a century. Ishmael, again, that's Muhammad, right? So the Jewish law and Ishmael, the son of Ishmael, which have ruled half the world for 10 centuries, still bear witness today to the great men who formulated them, Moses and Muhammad, right? And whereas proud philosophy and blind partisan spirits regard them merely as lucky impostors, the true political theorist admires in their institution that great and powerful genius which provides over the lasting establishment. That's 58. This is the idea of, and I think this is a powerful point in that sense, the idea of and this is why his praise of Calvin, right? And we can say maybe Luther too, in that sense, right? But Luther doesn't really create a people; he creates a religion that establishes and maintains, but doesn't really go on to doing the city. In other words, that's the difference between Calvin and Luther. Luther does not become a lawgiver. In that sense, maybe Luther, this is why Calvin is preferable. Calvin is a lawmaker. 57, 58, hold on. This sentence is apparently a direct criticism of Voltaire, who plays Muhammad, explicitly treats the son of Ismail as an impostor, right? This again. Uh, um, uh, Rousseau's view Moses and Muhammad as legislators rather than founders of religions follows Machiavelli's Prince, chapter 6. In a fragment, Rousseau imagines Moses joining the other famous legislators in the afterlife, saying, I lived alone on earth. Among the numerous people, I was alone. Lycurgus, Solon, Numa are my brothers. I have come to rejoin my family. I have come to enjoy finally the sweetness of conversing with my fellows, to speak and to be understood. This is in the Placide, volume 3 of the Rousseau's works, the Oeuvre, in the French. Um, and then let's finish here. It says, and one must not conclude from all of this, as Warburton does, that politics and religions have the common object for us, but rather that the origins of nations one serve as an instrument for the other. Now, this is the important. This is that it was this. Warburton argues that these religion and politics are the same thing. Rousseau says no, they're not. They're different. The difference is that religion plays an origin of the nation. In other words, the origins of the nation, right? Rousseau refers to William Warburton, Bishop of Gloucester, right, and authors the Alliance of Church and State and the Divine Legislation of Moses. This is Warburton. It's very. This is a book of the in the 18th century, right? Um, he's not saying no. He misses it. It plays what religion what that politics and religion have the common object for us. No, rather that at the origins of nation, one serves as the instrument of the other. Religion serves the instrument for the creation of the political. It's means to an end. It's not for religious means, it's political means. This is maybe the problem of, maybe this is also maybe in one sense, Rousseau's criticisms of Luther is that he cared more for the religious ends and refused the political ends. In other words, he didn't take what he did, his political moment, and do something political with it. And maybe that is the problem of maybe even the failure of all false prophets. And this is the failed prophets, right? The unarmed prophets that fail, right? This is Savonarola, right? Savonarola, who's very this, but then at the same time he's unarmed and he fails. Christ versus Christ also. Isn't this the criticism of Christ versus Muhammad and Moses? Christ promises no kingdom here, a future kingdom, not a present kingdom. He announces a kingdom, but in a kingdom that will not be here, right? So whereas Muhammad and this have a practical effect, and that's the kind of lesson here. Well, that's where we end. It's now leading us to the next chapter, which will be on the people, which gives us a clear understanding of what Rousseau is going to be doing, because the legislator creates the people. The social contract in the legislature. So now we find the means. Now, in the legislator, we find the means by which Rousseau argues, and it's going to be through religion. Now, it is Rousseau gives us a mechanism that explains how the social contract emerges rather than blind aggregated luck. Okay, and that's how we are confronted. So we'll stop here. If you have any comments, questions, please put it below. I'm sorry it took too long on this one. My long breaks from it. I hope to do next time. We're going to be looking at the last couple chapters of that. I mean, 9, maybe 8, 9. So if you have any comments, questions, please put them below, and I will see when I see them, I will reply. If you have any, if you liked it, like it. You like what I did, like it, hit the like button. Share with social media, share with friends. If you didn't like it, of course you can say no, but say why, what's wrong, what you didn't like it in that sense. Maybe I'm not in, maybe I don't get enough graphics and like this. I'm just old fashioned in that sense. Another thing is, if you've not subscribed, please subscribe. Let's grow the channel a little bit. It's kind of important that the channel grow. I need to, encourage your friends who are studying political thought, studying Rousseau or other texts. Again, you can if you're into, we talked about other texts here so far. You can check not only my Montesquieu text. You can look at maybe my Aristotle politics text. It's the politics that I did this course, but also you can look at what I did already in Machiavelli's Prince and also in John Locke's Social Contract. For those of you who wish to go check my previous video series on these that are relevant to what we're covering here in this. So if you, that's one thing you do. Check it, subscribe, encourage others. You can want to follow me on social media. The links are below. You can also follow my academic links. The academic social media links are there too. If you want to help me do what I do, it'd be nice. I could use the help. It's expensive. I'm buying books and doing things. I got a lot of books already, and I always need more books. I just got today. I'll say this. I got today. Yeah, yesterday I was sick. I was sick yesterday. I got a new book by Peter Turchin. I'm reading, and on his new, the end times. Is the father of Cleo. Uh, well, I can't say the word Cleodynamics, um, which is cycles of history and this idea. Um, I've always been I've liked Turchin, but it's going to be weird. So again, it costs money. Books are getting expensive. Um, Another thing I can do is you can do so you can do so becoming a subscribe star and Patreon member below. Another way you can do it is buy one of my books listed below. Again, we continue next time. We'll start in chapters 8 of book 2. We'll continue. Next time it's going to be, we always do this on Monday, Wednesdays. And if you have, and then Thursday, on Tuesday, Thursdays, you should be seeing Carl Schmidt stuff at this time. There's other things. So that's the schedule of what's going on. And Friday, some live event or something like that will be normally done. Okay, well, that's it. Take care. Have a good day. See you later. And see you next time. Bye bye.